Hello, welcome to FSH Plus. This will be the new home of these brochure videos from now on, moving them over from the main channel because I just don't feel like they fit the overall style of the channel. And now that I've got this second channel for automotive-related videos that aren't in the documentary style of full service history, I thought it just made sense to do them here. So today the topic is, as you can see, this Vauxhall Driver's Choice brochure. So this is October 1992, but it's for, as we can, well, you probably can't see because it's on black text on a dark blue background up there, but it's for the 1993 model year. So let's get into it, really. So at the start we see this very sort of 80s and 90s image of going through. I originally thought this was going through a tunnel because of how dark it is, but no, it's just a very well-lit motorway. And we can see the model range here. So you've got the Nova, the Astra Convertible, which we'll get onto because it's a different generation, the Cavalier, Calibra, Carlton, Senator, and Frontera. I misremembered what was in this brochure when I picked it for this video, because I remembered there also being the Monterey. But no, that was... I looked it up, and that was much later. That was 1997, I believe. So yes, let's get into it. So first we've got, like with the previous brochure I've covered, the Rover, the Ford, etc. They have like an overview of the brand as a whole and what they're doing for this year. And interestingly, this one features the GM Impact concept, which would become the EV1. So that's interesting. It seems to... say that may eventually become a Vauxhall, or at least imply that. But the rest of it is all standard stuff. You've got the emphasis on safety, you've got all the models, you've got the security and profits and like asset protection stuff and all sorts. So this brochure mainly contains models that were introduced in the 80s, the late 80s, we'll get onto that. But the new model for this brochure, because every brochure's got to have one new model that it focuses on, and for that, that's the facelifted Cavalier Mark III. So, I said about models being introduced in the 80s. Here's one. This was the final, this 1993, which is the model year of the vehicles in this brochure. Oh, sorry, wasn't focused. 1993 would be the final year for the Nova, because it had been going since 1982, so it was incredibly dated, because you think by this point, I believe the likes of the Peugeot 106 had released, which was just, more modern than this in every single way. But I mean, still a decent looking car. I do love the wheels on both vehicles. So this is the layout for all of the vehicles. It's a bit different from again, the aforementioned Ford and Rover brochures of a similar era, because they don't have, apart from just the like title pages for each vehicle, there are no like really big photos. It's just a collection of much smaller ones, smaller details. So that sort of sets it apart from other brochures, I think, at least. And the other thing that you'll notice about this brochure is inconsistency. Not in terms of layout, but in terms of details. So, for example, you can see up here, there's the then fairly new Vauxhall badge, where they first went over to the round style. But if you look closely, throughout the brochure, you'll be able to see the old square one, like on the badge of this Nova GSI. So yeah, you'll see that. I'll point it out as I see it, where they use the old badge or the new badge. Although it's interesting that they use the old badge on that picture of the Nova GSI, but yet on the one on the sort of cover page for the Nova, I can just make out that it's got the round badge, the newer badge. So I don't know why they didn't redo the photos using that silver vehicle, considering this interior photo here also has the round badge. So yeah, a bit of inconsistency there, but that's, every brochure's inconsistent in some way. Hell, the Rover one that I said about earlier, that's got different fonts and different styles for every vehicle. You know, that's consistently inconsistent. So about the Nova itself, one thing that struck me, apart from it just being very dated, was them saying the price-leading Nova Trip, which was the base model at the time, is particularly tempting with its 1.2 injection catalytic converter engine and interior luxury, engendering the thought that if the price-leading Nova is this good, the others must be terrific. And that phrase of saying, oh, the base model is so good, the rest must be amazing, reminds me of what they did with the, I believe it was the Mark IV Volkswagen Golf, with, I believe it had a car, I might be wrong here, but I remember it was a VW product, having a carpeted glove box, and the thought process was, oh, if they've put carpet in there and they've thought about the sound deadening of that, imagine what they've done to the rest of the car. And that's what that sentence about the Nova reminds me of. But apart from that, it's just typical, trying to sell a dated vehicle. So like they talk about likability and low prices and all of that sort of thing. So, although they didn't show it earlier on, the Nova Saloon was still available now, but only in one trim level, which was the base model, and you couldn't get the 2-door saloon anymore. It was just the 4-door. But yeah, they didn't really want to show it because people weren't buying them anymore, really, because small saloons have just fallen out of favour. Hence why we never got the Corsa B saloon here, although it was sold in other countries until I think the mid 2010s as the Buick Sail in China. But yes, I think every car in this brochure has this second page spread, which talks about equipment and also has statistics about the car. So one thing that's interesting about that is that when talking about the power, they don't actually show the horsepower figure, which people think, oh, that's quite a recent thing. People were using kilowatts or PS instead of horsepower. But no, Vauxhall was doing it back in 1992. So that's somewhat interesting. Maybe. So now coming on to the Astra. This is the Astra F. And this is, I believe, the second newest car in this brochure, although by this point it was already 2 years old. So that shows that this whole brochure is quite a dated model range. But this Astra did still look current in 1993. It was a very well-designed car. It's probably my favourite Astra, to be honest. Maybe the Mark I, but this comes close. So this generation of Astra was significant for two reasons. One was that it was the first Opel Astra, because all the Opel equivalents of the Vauxhall Astra previous to this were badged as cadets. This was the first Opel Astra. And it was also when the Belmont became the Astra Saloon, which they didn't want to continue the Belmont name. I guess because they just wanted to consolidate the whole range into one model, because it was a bit later than this that then Ford renamed the Orion to just the Escort Saloon. So I guess it was just what manufacturers wanted to do to condense their model ranges. Yeah, you can see there it's just part of the main range. Quite a good looking main range as well. Usually when there's a saloon version and a 3-door, 5-door and estate, there's usually a weak link there. It's usually, it can be the 3-door hatch can sometimes look a bit weird, but usually it's the saloon. But in this case, it's entirely good. Especially the Astra GSI. I love how that looks. Partly biased because I watch a lot of old rallying stuff, and the Group A version of that Astra looks amazing in my opinion. Although I have always thought that it does look like a Skoda, I think it's a Skoda Felicia, with how the grille looks, which slightly takes away from it, but I do like the Felicia, so it's not that bad. So yeah, again, same format, lots of small images, and a lot of text, and all the millions of trims and engine choices you could have, from a 1.4 Merit all the way up to a 2-litre GSI. and then you can see the range there, all with the interesting rear wheel arches, which, you know, are one of the defining characteristics of this Astra, are those sort of, I don't know whether you call them blistered, but yeah, odd rear wheel arches. And now we get on to the interesting Astra in here, which is the Astra E Convertible, because, you know, it's two different generations of Astra in one brochure, and this was because the actual Astra Convertible of the F generation hadn't come out yet. It was delayed compared to the regular car, so they had to make do with the old Astra Convertible because it was still a fairly well-selling segment. And this is where we come back to the badge inconsistency that I said before, because I believe almost every image of the Astra Convertible in here uses the old square badge. Even the diagram uses the square badge. So that also, if people didn't recognise that this was the previous generation of Astra, that would definitely give it away using the old branding. Although you would be able to tell that this was the old Astra quite easily because there was a big shift in design between the two models, and the fact that you could only get this in 2 trim levels, one of which was only available in one paint colour, which was this sort of lovely dark cherry reddish sort of colour. And that's the sign of a model that's about to go away, is the fact that they only have 1 or 2 trim levels. We'll get onto that with the Senator later on. And now the newest car in this brochure, which was the, as I said before, the facelifted Cavalier Mark III. So this is what I think of when I think of the Cavalier Mark III. The older one with the grey, louvered grille, I do like, but this is definitely more what comes to mind, and I think that's because I really like the Cavalier Turbo 4x4, although annoyingly it was never available, I don't think, or at least it isn't in this brochure, with the hatchback body, and I think you can see in that image there, the proportions of the saloon body just don't look right to me. I think it just looks a bit long. It's got a similar problem to the old Vauxhall Belmonts I talked about before, where the saloon looks like a bit of an afterthought, whereas the hatchback looks much nicer, and I'm somewhat biased because it reminds me of the Rover 800, which is one of my favourite cars. But yeah, talking about it exactly the same as the other vehicles, going through all the loads of different models, and they also talk about diesels because the late 80s, early 90s are when diesels were properly making themselves known with, beyond vans and commercial applications. You'd find them in pretty much every vehicle around this point, just because they were actually becoming worth getting. They were getting quieter, they were getting faster, they were getting smoother. They were just getting better. So a lot of the diesels that are in here are made by Isuzu. General Motors leveraging all of their different brands. And that also went the other way, so a lot of the vehicles in here, not the Cavalier ironically, you could get as like a Holden or a Chevrolet, although ironically the Chevrolet Cavalier is not the same as the Vauxhall Cavalier. So this Cavalier was the first generation Opel Vectra, but the reason why Vauxhall didn't use the Vectra name for this first generation, even though it was alliterative, was because they were worried that it would be associated with the Victor, which had a lot of issues with rust and was generally thought of as poor quality by consumers. So they just stuck with the Cavalier name, which they knew was that they knew worked for them and that people recognised. And it paid off. This was, a good selling car. In the latter days of the Sierra, I believe this did outsell it. Although, of course, by 1993, the Mondeo had come onto the scene, and that was, a sales phenomenon because the Cavalier was quite old. At the time of this brochure going to print, it was 5 years old, which is nearing the end for most vehicles, and it would only go on for another 2 years. So it's quite a late facelift, really. Of course, when there's a Mark III Cavalier, there must be a Calibra as well. Often regarded as the most aerodynamic car ever made at the time, and it even mentions it there. However, what they don't mention is that was only for the base model. I don't even believe the base model that got that figure was still available in 1993, because it was very much just to get that figure of a 0.26 CD, which, it says there. 0.26D for the 8-valve model. Okay, it was still available then, I stand corrected. But if you went up the tiers to like the top, the really quick turbo, due to the alloys and like spoilers and all that sort of thing, that would go down. So I think it was like 0.29 for the turbo, which was still very good, but it was obviously worse. But they didn't tell you that. They let you believe that you were in an incredibly aerodynamic car, regardless of model. So it also says that it's the best-selling car in the class. That's not surprising, considering its only rival in terms of like European vehicles was the Ford Probe, which I know isn't European, but the Japanese coupes was still sort of in their own class, and the Calibra and Probe was sort of the continuation of the Capri and the Manta, and the Cavalier was just so much better than the Probe that, it's no wonder it outsold it. In terms of looks, I think that they're about equal. I like both of them, but the Calibra, it just looks very narrow at the front, which, of course, is due to wanting that aerodynamic record, but it just looks a bit unfinished, especially from that angle, because there's just nothing on the front bumper, apart from that narrow grille in the centre, and it doesn't look very balanced to me, but the overall proportions are brilliant. There you can see how slow. Talking about it continuing the legacy from the Capri and the Manta, the base models were just as slow, like 12 seconds if you wanted the base model auto, or 10 seconds 0 to 60 for the manual base model, which I know cars were slower in general then, but that, I think, even for the early 90s, that was slow for a sports coupe. But the turbo 4x4 made up for it by being 6.4 seconds 0 to 60, which is fairly quick even for today. I know we've become desensitized to acceleration times because of, like every hatchback does it in about that, and EVs, will do it in less than 3, but 6.4 seconds is still, as quick as you really need. You don't need to be going faster than that, really. And now, speaking of being very quick, we come onto a car that nowadays is really only known for its fast version, which is the Carlton. Loads of people know about the Vauxhall Lotus Carlton, but just the regular Vauxhall Carlton is forgotten. Or as it's known elsewhere, the Opel Omega, which, again, like the Cavalier, we didn't adopt that name until the next generation. Although I don't know the reason why for this one, beyond that Carlton was already in use and had brand recognition. But it certainly wasn't because Omega made people think of an older name like Vectra and Victor. So this would be near the end of production for the Carlton. It ended production in 1994, although it was based on the Senator, which ended production in 1993, and we'll get on to that. Although I always thought that this generation of Carlton looked a bit more dated than the Senator, so it's surprising that it lasted longer, but I guess it was just in a higher selling category of cars, the sort of premium, not luxury like the Senator, but premium. And having an estate would benefit that, especially in the UK, because we love our estates here, or at least we used to. Shame that they've gone away, because they're obviously very useful, because that's the point of them. So one thing about the diagrams of the Carlton in this is that they show both the regular saloon and the GSI, even though they have the exact same... my mistake. There's 0.2. Oh no, wait. Oh no, that's in inches. There's 4 centimeters difference, due to obviously having bigger bumpers. Because that was the thing in the 80s and 90s. You wanted to make a sports model, you just fill out the bumpers a bit more, as you can see here, and that did the trick. They were good looking cars, the GSIs. Is there a photo? Yeah, they're good looking car. Although the alloys are a bit mixed. It would be better if it had the alloys off the CD estate, but overall, good looking. And if you're wondering why the Lotus Carlton isn't in here, even though I mentioned it earlier, it's because it went out of production in 1992. So, as a brochure for the 1993 year, it would no longer be in production. But I don't believe the Lotus could be found in Vauxhall brochures anyway. I know that they had their own model-specific brochure, but I don't know if they would have just made mention to it in here, because later on there will be a mention to the Vauxhall Lotus Championship, which we'll get on to. So we get on to one of probably overall, I know I said the Astra was my favourite generation of Astra, but this is probably my favourite car in this whole brochure. It's the Senator. I just love how they look, especially in police livery. So this was, the pinnacle of Vauxhall at the time. It was the most luxurious model by far, and this was the year that it would go out of production, much like the Nova, although obviously it looks much more modern than the Nova. And by this point, we get on to what I said about with end-of-life models only having 1 or 2 trims. You could only get this in CD, Core Diplomatique trim, which was the top trim level. But you could still get it with 2 different engines. You get it with the 2.6 V6 or the 3 litre V6. I don't know what proportion each got sold. Most of the Survivors now are 3 litres, I would have thought. But I assume the 2.6 at the time sold well, otherwise they wouldn't have kept it around, at the end of production. So this is just talking all about all the different features you get, some of which are quite quaint to look at, that they'd be in a luxury car now. Like electrically adjustable door mirrors, and just an electric sunroof, all that sort of thing. Although this was a bit of a trendsetter for some things, like it was the first use of electronic adjustable suspension in a mass market European car, which obviously, most cars nowadays, you can set up the suspension, you can ruin it with sport mode or try and make it better with comfort mode or whatever, but this was the first European mainstream or somewhat mainstream car to have that. Not all of its odd aspects like that were adopted by everyone. Like, for example, you could get a optional refrigerated glove box, which you don't see many cars having nowadays, I'll be honest. I'd love to see how small that glove box was, because I bet with the refrigerated aspect, with it, glove boxes are already fairly small, it would have just shrunk it, so you would have been able to fit, like a can of drink and nothing else in there, I would imagine. There you can see all of the equipment there, which it's slightly odd that they have all of this. Bearing in mind they're both the same trim level. The only difference in this whole chart is that the 2.6 didn't get a limited slip diff, and the 3 litre did. That's the only difference throughout this. The only other things that come up are that you could get a manual gearbox for either instead of the auto, and you could get this, where is it? This little trip computer in either, or wool trim if you didn't want leather. That was it. The rest of it was all the same. You just chose what engine you had, and they were both decent engines. The 2.6 was a little on the slower side, but I wouldn't say that it was underpowered looking at these statistics. It's about 10 seconds, not 60, which I know I criticised that in the Calibra earlier, but this is a different class of car. It's more relaxed, and that's decent enough. And then the 3 litre was about 8 seconds, which, again, that is good enough. That's all you need in a big luxury car. And it was big. It was bigger than the Carlton that it was based on, because obviously it was in the class above. Getting to the final car that's in here, or final cars, I should say, is the Frontera, or as it's based on the Isuzu MU for the 3-door and the Isuzu MUW for the 5-door, which stands for Isuzu Mysterious Utility and Mysterious Utility Wizard, because Japanese car names are strange. So that they were some of the names, but it had, I believe, 13 names in total across the world, including one of them, weirdly. In some countries, you could buy this and it would be called the Honda Jazz, because up until the Jazz was set out to be the Fit, Jazz was used on loads of different Honda names. I believe you get motorbikes with that name as well. But yes, many names, including, I believe it was also sold in China or license built there, and that had, incredibly long alphanumeric names, as many Chinese models do. So this was another car that started production in the 80s in this brochure, in 1989, although the Vauxhall version took another 2 years to release, so 1991. So this is, along with the Astra F, this is the joint newest car in this brochure. And it was, quite a good concept. It was what you'd think of as crossovers nowadays, but at the time these were classed as recreational vehicles, like your Toyota RAV4s and stuff like that, your Suzuki Vitaras, another one. But at that time, they could still go off-road properly, not like the crossovers nowadays. And that was because they weren't just meant to look off-roady. Obviously, they were meant to look off-roady because that's what sold them, but they made him be good off-road as well, because that's what some buyers wanted. They wanted an off-roader, but didn't want a Land Rover or something. They wanted a bit more civility than a Defender, cheaper than a Discovery. They just wanted something to use for that purpose, and these filled it in well. A lot of people say that they were terrible, but I think for the job that they set out to do and the jobs that people use them for, they were, they did the job. One thing that is odd about them is that of the 3 engines you could get, 2 of them were petrol, and the other was diesel. But if it released nowadays, you'd expect that, because diesel isn't as popular anymore, apart from Audi, which use it for all of their S models for some reason. And petrols are the norm. But around this time, as I said earlier, with diesels coming onto the scene, they were especially popular in 4x4s. So to have only one diesel option was just seems a bit strange. And it was only available in the 5-door. You could only get the 2-litre petrol in the... where is the 3-door? There. You can only get the 2-litre petrol in that, whereas you could get a 2.4 petrol or a 2.3 turbo diesel in the 5-door. And this confused me, but it does make sense looking at the statistics here, because the petrol 0 to 60 was 0 to 60 in 14 seconds, which is surprisingly slow for a 2-litre petrol in a little 3-door 4x4. The 2.4 petrol in the 5-door was 16 seconds 0 to 60, and the diesel was 19 seconds, which I know I compared it to Land Rovers earlier, but that's on par with them, and they're known for being slow. So that makes more sense now why they were regarded as quite terrible, because buying that as a family car with that sort of speed it just wasn't good enough. I sound like a teacher disappointed in Vauxhall, but it just wasn't good enough. I assume they must have gotten faster over time, because they kept building them up until 2004. In an evolved generation. But yeah, you could buy Frontera up until 2004, and by that point, 19 seconds 0 to 60 was, you'd struggle to find a van that did it that slow. And to move on to more positive things, it's the accessories, showing this very nice looking Astra estate and a base model Cavalier, the Envoy, with a sports body kit, which it's interesting that they've chosen the base model to show off that. Although I suppose it's to show that you can have it on any model you want. So that makes sense in that regard. So that's the sort of body kit I was talking about, the sports style, which I think looks brilliant apart from the grille. The grille has this sort of V shape, which, ironically, the facelifted version of this Astra would go on to adopt, but because it's body colour in this one, it looks rather like Nissan's grille of the era, that you'd see on, Primeras and Almeras and all that sort of thing. So that I'd leave that out, but the actual body kit itself I think looks really good. Same with the one on this Calibra. Also, that Calibra photo looks like a very modern, the sort of thing you see on modern car brochures, whereas all of the rest of the photos throughout it are very much, the old style of doing things, whereas that, with a blurred background and a dark-coloured car, it's makes it look newer than it is. It almost looks like it was from the 2000s. But yes, the rest of these are very, I don't know if you call them quaint, but the sort of thing I mean. Bright colours, mountains in the background, usually a red car. Yes, it's good though. They're good looking photos. All of the photos are in here. Sometimes photos in car brochures can be quite dodgy. I've got a Citroen brochure from the early 80s that I may do a video on at some point, but it's got some brilliant ideas for photos, but the actual execution is a bit iffy. Right, now on to the final part of this, which is the motorsport, and this is where the Vauxhall Lotus challenge I was talking about earlier comes in. And also, this page features a mention of my favourite rally driver. So I watch a lot of old rally reviews of the WRC, of the British Rally Championship, etc. And my favourite driver is Dave Metcalf in the Nova GT. That's not him in it, that's Mark Higgins, but that was what he drove. And he's amazing to watch. If after this video, if you do one thing, go and watch an old British Rally Championship season review from the early 90s, like 1991, 92, or even a bit older, like 1989. Because he's just a joy to watch, because he will go flat out everywhere. And it would pay off. He would, a couple of times, he would get amazing finishes in this little Nova, beating Sierra Cosworths and M3s and all that sort of thing, in a little 1.6 Nova. And it's just a joy to watch. But sadly, this brochure is from October 1992, and in, I believe it was December 1992, he was killed in a road crash. I believe it had something to do with a Calibra 4x4 rally car, although I've seen conflicting things on whether he was driving it, whether he's shaking it down in testing, or whether it was on a trailer that he was towing. But I do know that the crash wasn't in a rally, it was just a regular road crash. And it's very unfortunate because he was quite young, he was 35. It's very sad. But yes, while he was still around, he would be just amazing to watch in the Novas and Astras. As I said, often beating the, if he was driving a Nova, beating the Astras, the 2-litre Astras that were also part of the Vauxhall Works team, which I'm sure was quite embarrassing for them. And Vauxhall was successful in the BTCC as well, with the Cavaliers, with John Cleland and Jeff Allen. They were doing well. That was a brilliant era for touring car racing, the super touring era, and Vauxhall were present for all of it. Unlike a lot of, I believe they may have been along with maybe Toyota, they were the only manufacturer that were present for start to finish of the super touring era, because its costs just went up and up. A lot of manufacturers pulled out, and you can see that in the final 1 or 2 seasons of it is that there are only 3 or 4 works teams competing, and Vauxhall was one of them. So this final page is just about customer care and has an inquiry slip that you can tear off and send in, saying what vehicle you're interested in, or inquiring about. and then all of their different brands, so Vauxhall Assistant, Shoreguard, Finance, Insurance, Rental, Leasing, Mastercover, Motability, etc. All with pretty much the same logo. It's interesting that they use a new logo for each one instead of just doing the little brand name under each, so like Assistant, Shoreguard, Finance, Insurance, etc. And of course, like every customer care portion of a brochure, you've got to have a photo within a dealership with some period clothing. Actually, I make a joke about that, but that brown sweater is actually quite nice. And the final page, some brochures will continue the front cover photo onto the back, but not Vauxhall. It's just text about that all information is up to date at time of print, and talking about colours, because this was still when colours and trims will be in a separate brochure, and accessories. You get maybe a double page spread on them, if that. And just talking about, that's interesting, they talk about the paper being printed on environmentally friendly paper, which, that's quite forward thinking. And then just the date published, the fact that they're owned by General Motors, as if the many mentions within the brochure wasn't enough. And that's it. It's a very simple front and rear cover. So yes, that was the 1993 model year Vauxhall Driver's Choice brochure. It is the newest Vauxhall brochure I own. I also own a Vauxhall Opal one from, I think it's about 10 years before this, so 1982, 1983-ish, which I'll do a video on eventually, but not for a while. I don't like to repeat brands, in subsequent videos. Like, that's what I've done. Rover, Ford, Mazda, Vauxhall. Because it just gets repetitive. People don't want that. So yes, this will be the first of the brochure videos on FSH Plus. Other content you'll find on this channel will be museum reviews. I've got a video about a hill climb that I've attended for a lot of my life, and it's very special to me. What else have I got? I've got things planned that are just not the documentary style of a full service history, but are still car related, and I still think there's interest in it. So the brochure videos that were uploaded on the original channel but are now unlisted, there you can find them all. There's a public playlist of brochure reviews on this channel, and you can go on there and you can find all of them if you want to watch them. If you just want to watch me ramble for half an hour or more. I'm seeing this video is quite long as it is. This will be one of my longest videos, if not my longest. And I apologise because I'm not the most interesting to listen to. But if you've liked it, say in the comments if you got this far. I doubt much of you did. And yeah, thank you for watching. Thank you for going on my newest channel.